Thank you very much, Lindsay. Tonight's meeting is about the town centre, a subject that is of constant concern and interest to members of the society, and indeed I think concern is the more operative word over the last couple of years. We're going to hear about the partnership, which I shall say a word or two about in a moment, and also about the proposed scheme for the improvement of High Street and Bridge Street. And to do that, I'm delighted to welcome Geraldine Collinge, who is the Director of Creative Placemaking and Public Programmes at the RSC, and also John Myatt from PGA Consultants, who have been instrumental in working at the scheme that you will see more about. First, a word about the partnership, of which Geraldine is the chair. It's been here for about 12 months or so. I think the background to it is simply this, that members of the society will be well aware that over quite a lot of years now, one of the things that's characterised decision-making about the town and the town centre is a lack of consensus amongst those organisations who've got a part to play, who are, in the jargon of the day, stakeholders. And that lack of consensus from time to time has missed opportunities for the town. This was something recognised by the neighbourhood development plan, which was worked up, of which the society were instrumental parts. That was approved in 2018. As I say, it recognised this, and one of its strong recommendations was that there should be brought together a partnership or a team of people who are drawn from all the organisations of the town that have a part in all the key decisions, to try to bring a common view and, if you like, speak with a common voice for Stratford-upon-Avon, and to argue the case where that should be necessary. The concern then, and the research for the neighbourhood development plan goes back not far short of 10 years, the concern then was principally about shopping in the town centre, whether shopping in the town centre could compete and continue to maintain its strength against out-of-town shopping and against the burgeoning use of the internet. That concern, I think, is developed and broadened. It's perhaps differently, it should be expressed differently now, but it is no less. And Geraldine, I'm sure, will go into the background to why that is. I should just recognise the Town Council, who are the, if you like, the guardians of the enforcement or the development of the neighbourhood development plan, took this policy as one of its first objectives, and they should be recognised, if not congratulated, for what they did to bring the partnership to active fruition. So that's the background, members. I'm very delighted now to hand over to Geraldine, who will speak for up to half an hour or so. We'll have some questions after Geraldine has spoken, and then I propose that after that, John comes and talks to us in some detail and presents some drawings and pictures of the Bridge Street, High Street proposals. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thanks. Oh, high pitched. Thanks, everybody, and thanks particularly to John for that introduction. It's interesting, actually. So some of the things that I'll touch on, obviously, John will go into in more detail. So yeah, we'll start to talk about the High Street, Bridge Street, but then I'll leave you to pick that up, John, in specifics. And I'm really happy to take questions, comments, etc. as we go, if that's easier for people rather than waiting till the end. So yeah, don't be shy if you want to ask something. And apologies to Jenny, who's been to most of the meetings and who could possibly do this better than me. So it's nice to see you there amongst other friendly faces here. So like John said, sorry, just finding my notes, bear with. So as John said, the partnership was one of the direct actions from the Neighbourhood Development Plan, and was intended to be a representative organisation. So we have representatives from the main organisations in the town. So as John said, I'm Director of Creative Placemaking at the Royal Shakespeare Company. We've also got representation from the Birthplace Trust, and the Town Trust, as well as then from the 3 respective councils. And I think what's really helpful is that we've got representation at officer level as well as then at councillor level, and also that we're we're coming together across different political parties and political motivations. So I think it's it's no small feat that we all come together and have a fruitful and meaningful conversation on approximately a monthly basis. And what I'd like to hope is fundamentally different about this group compared to other groups that lots of us have been to in Stratford is that we're all motivated by that same goal, that we want to make Stratford an even better place to live, work and visit, to encourage investment in, and to make it a sustainable place for the future. I think there's an acknowledgement that Stratford, it's an incredible town. We've been incredibly fortunate, but there's lots of change that's happened across the UK that is also impacting on Stratford, not least the pandemic, and we need to take action as a result of that. I found it particularly striking that when I came to Stratford after the first lockdown, so I live just out of the district in North Oxfordshire, and that it felt like the story of Shakespeare had left the town. With the businesses closed, with the RSC closed, with SBT closed, it felt, Stratford had kind of lost its purpose to me, and that sense of Stratford without Shakespeare felt galvanising, and that made me realise that we needed to work together as a town to make sure that we kept that. And I suppose the other thing that's really important to say is that I think that it's really important that we're thinking towards the future in terms of Stratford, that we're thinking about it as a place that's going to be prosperous into the future, and that we're doing that we're holding its heritage close to us, and that we're inspired by its heritage, whether that be the makeup of the town itself, its amazing architecture, and of course its Shakespeare heritage. But at the same time, we're thinking about what will that mean for the future. And I'm not saying that we haven't done that before, but it feels particularly, to use that word again, galvanizing at the moment, given the shocks that we've been through as a country in the last few years. So I suppose it was interesting preparing for this, and in fact, we're going to have a public meeting, hopefully for our December meeting, and we'll be talking a bit more about the achievements this year and what we want to focus on next year. So I don't want to kind of do a rehearsal of that conversation without having discussed it with the other members first, because indeed that's on the agenda for our next meeting that I was just looking at before this meeting. So it's a surprise sharing ahead of schedule for those people that will be there. But I think I think it can't be underestimated how important it's been for us to have time to come together as a group, and for people to air their views and to have their views respected, but for us to have time to be able to move forward and to come together around a kind of a future facing vision, and to think about what it is that we need to do as a group. So I thought it might be helpful, I think I can share. I thought it might be helpful to share our, oh, bear with me, I've got too many thingies open. Sorry, getting there. No, I'm just going to shut some windows, forgive me, because I can't see what I want to see. There we go. Let's do that one. So this is probably too small, so I'm just going to make it larger. Is that visible to people now? Yeah, great, thank you. So what we tried to do is that we took some of the strategic items from the neighbourhood development plan, because obviously it's, as most of you well know, it's an enormous document, and what we wanted to do is to take the priorities from there and to think about what comes together, and then we've done a piece of work to start to think about the dependencies. So I'm sure John will touch on this when he's talking through the scheme, but you know, it's evidence that if we pedestrianise part of the town, we need to think about how are people going to be able to cycle there. Do we need to think about where people can park if they're not parking in those parts of town? So the kind of different dependencies of different elements of the neighbourhood plan, because that to me feels really key, and that if we start to address one area without thinking about its dependencies, then we're going to trip ourselves up. So so for example, we've discussed that our main aim is about revitalising the town centre, which I think, as you said, John, that's where this all begins, really, isn't it? So it's a virtuous circle to think about. We need to revitalise the town centre. We want to create a modern town that's fit for the future. So some of the ways that I'm not going to go through this all, but I'll pull out some of the key points. So some of the ways that we might want to do that is by advocating and facilitating independent shops. And what I'm hearing is that the small shop units are actually now turning over, and that we're getting new tenants into the small shop units. So that's really great to hear. I think where we've got some more challenging units, we know some of the bigger ones like the old BHS, you know, we all want to do something about that, but it's thinking properly commercially about how we could make that work. So what are the different things that we can be thinking about? So yeah, campaigning against unoccupied properties. So thinking about different pilot schemes, and I'll talk a bit about that in more detail in a minute. So pressing for the conversion of major former shops. So obviously that's alluding to BHS and also Debenhams. Think about how we can remove the clutter around town. So in the town centre, cleaning up the town centre shopfront scheme, which I think the Stratford Society was instrumental in working on. Good, I've got some nodding heads. And then thinking about how we can recommend making those changes. So those are some of the things in the kind of basket about revitalising the town centre, and I'll share in a minute some work that I've done to think about some specifics that we might want to look at then. Bridge Street and High Street improvements. So as I say, I know John's going to go on to talk about this in more detail. But, you know, we know that then has got knock-on, particularly, as I said at the beginning, in the balance between the vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists in the town, and then to the, you know, then to broader traffic management. So I won't go through all of this document because you guys all know what's in it because it's come from the neighbourhood development plan. But I suppose what I wanted to show you was that how we try to think about bringing things together so that we can think about them more holistically, and we can think about, well, if we do that, then that's got a knock on to this, and how do we look at that as a whole? So I just wanted to share that, and then like I say, at the last meeting I did a bit of work specifically about shop fronts. Oh, still too many documents open. Sorry. This is the problem of being at the end of a busy day. There we go. So, can you, no, yes, is that working? Can you see that? I can make it bigger if that's helpful. A bit bigger. So what we're trying to do at the moment is to, I suppose, do two things. Make sure that we've got the right information coming into the group so that we can make informed decisions. Learn from work that's happened in other parts of the country, and particularly there's a huge project happening just down the road in Coventry at the moment, and then think about what we need to do to help to make some of these changes, particularly when, I should say, we're not a formally constituted group, so we can't apply for funding, and we don't have a pot of money that we can go to make change. So we're always having to be quite entrepreneurial about how we can make change. So who could we go to deliver this kind of work, or who could we, where can we lever? So that's really important to understand, and I should have said it earlier. So one, I suppose, understanding kind of current occupation and planning applications in process. So we're thinking about how we can do that. And then a really key piece of work that we're going to be doing soon is to bring together landlords and agents so that we can understand their strategies. So we know that sometimes it's beneficial to have an unoccupied building, sadly. So what lobbying can we do that will encourage people to not leave their buildings unoccupied, or how can we help by perhaps bringing together I don't know, Stratford College and landlords, so that we can help them to think about, well, together maybe you can solve some of each other's needs. So really trying to think about those kind of ways of working. Like I said before, advocating and facilitating independent shops, and thinking about pop-up shops as well, so where we can bring those in. Supporting the conversion of properties to residential. So we know that that's happening in the town at first floor, but thinking about that more broadly through the town, because that as well will help us to change the nature of the town, so that there's more reason for shops to be there, more reason for the shops to be there later into the day. Also, like I say, think about educational use. So if we bring some different stakeholders together, is there ways that we can think about different use of buildings? I don't know if any of you know about some of the marketplaces that have opened in larger properties, larger buildings. So famously, Time Out, which is started as a listings magazine in London, has opened markets now all around the world really successfully in different disused buildings. So I've been to one in New York that's a food market, and it's a really gorgeous place to go, super busy, very a really nice place to visit. And there's a version of that in a former BHS building in Banbury, which happily in Banbury happens to knock onto the canal side, where there's recently been some development. So they've been able to use that opportunity to think about then how do they convert this empty shop. So that's what I mean about thinking differently about how we can bring some different stakeholders, to coin the word of the moment, to quote John, together to think about use of space. At the same time, there's also something called meanwhiling, which some of you might have heard of, which is a bit like pop-up shops, which is where you can get people into to use space on a short-term basis. So you might have artists or community organisations, voluntary organisations using space on a temporary basis that's supported by the landlords, means that they get cheaper rates. But again, a great way to get different kind of usage into towns. So these are some of the things that we've been talking about recently. Oh, something I should share that I was really proud of. So some of you, with my RSC hat on, some of you will know that last year we did a Advent trail last Christmas. And in summer, we did something called a costume trail. So some shops in the centre of town were decorated by some RSC costumes, and we produced a trail and people could go around and find different costumes. And one of the participating shops told us that in the 2 weeks of the trail, their sales increased by like 29% one week and then 33% the following week. So, you know, we might think these are small artistic interventions that aren't going to make a big difference, but I think cumulatively, you know, these sorts of things can help to change the town centre. And yeah, it was really heartening to get those stats from a business on Greenhill Street, which we know can feel a bit neglected in the heart of the town. And then there are other things that I think aren't a priority for us yet, but I think we can start to think about. I'm sure some of you will know about parklets, which are small areas. So the tradition of a parklet is that it's developed by a community group, and it's a tiny area. People took over parking spaces and made them into parks, made them into areas where people could sit. So, you know, bringing some more greenery into the town. We're lucky that we're surrounded by greenery, but, you know, how can we get more of that kind of thing happening? They've slightly been taken over now by cafes to use as a way to get people to be able to sit out on the street. And we know that some people have done that in Stratford, which is a good thing. But the original parklets are community led, which I think is important for us to think about. Another thing that I think is really important, and that that surprised me really, is that Stratford isn't perceived as a creative town. So even though, you know, we've got creativity running through every street in the town, and we're Shakespeare's birthplace, you know, England's leading writer. Someone said to me, oh, why don't you look at Leamington for how a creative town is run? And I was so surprised to hear that. And it brought me up short to think, oh, Stratford isn't perceived as a creative town despite our great creative heritage. And I think that's something that that I'd like us to think about more, and to think about how we can make more of our creative assets and get more creativity around the town. And then I suppose the other thing that we spent some time doing is to think about how we can position ourselves publicly. So how we can position ourselves to get more inward investment. I know there are some opportunities which Stratford hasn't gone for, or Stratford's been perceived as too wealthy to qualify for. So I think there's a piece of work that we need to do that's external facing, that says, yes, Stratford's great, yes, we've got lots going for us, but also there are some things that we need to urgently do to make sure that we keep being great, and that we keep being the place that we are now. So we did a bit of work thinking about how we'd want to describe Stratford to external people, and it'd be good to test that on you. I don't know if John's fed that back to you, because obviously, again, I should have said at the beginning, the Town Centre Partnership is a representative group. So, you know, as as Stratford Society members, you are all represented through John in that group. So it's important to feel that it's your group, as well as, you know, it's not, doesn't just belong to the people who are in the room or on the Zoom. So I'll put this into the chat, but what we're playing with at the moment is a way of describing Stratford to people externally, is that Stratford-upon-Avon is a thriving, prosperous riverside town that attracts people to live, work, visit and spend time within its unique Shakespearean setting. And that felt like a good way of communicating who we are. And we have got a little bit of money to pay Advent Communications to do some work with us. So at the moment, they are creating what we've called a prospectus, but actually might end up being a website, I guess, a more contemporary prospectus, but, you know, some way that we can promote Stratford externally and help to raise the profile of Stratford with people who might want to invest in it in the way that has been invested in Bell Court. And I think you can really see how that investment is paying off. So I suppose I wanted to end by saying a little bit about the levelling up bid. So I know John's going to talk about the scheme itself, and it'd be great. Kind of feels all part of the same conversation. So I'd quite like to do it as one conversation, if that would work for you, John. So maybe we go to John next and then come back and do questions as a kind of whole piece. I don't know. Let's hold that in our heads and then come back to it. But one thing I wanted to say about the levelling up bid. So it was completely brilliant, I think, that Warwickshire County Council supported the proposal for the works in High Street and Bridge Street, and that they invested considerable time, energy and money in supporting that bid. And even though the bid itself hasn't been successful at the first round of levelling up, I don't think we should take that too much of a negative. You know, I don't know, I'm sure some of you will have looked at which of the bids were successful and where they were. And, you know, in our region, it was a bid from Nuneaton and Bedworth. You know, locally, a lot of money went to places like Stoke and to Wolverhampton and the Black Country. So, you know, we were always pitching ourselves in a very competitive environment, and one where people might not think that Stratford needs levelling up in the same way as some of those other places do. So it was always a bit of a punt. But I think what is so great is that we worked together and that we did that punt, because often what I've heard is that we talk ourselves out of it and say, oh, Stratford won't get that money, or, you know, we can't spend the time developing that when, you know, we don't know if everybody's going to like it. So for me, that was really, really important that we did that together. And I hope is a real signal of the way that we're going, with hopefully more financial success. We know that there's a second round of levelling up, that hopefully we're going to get some feedback on the bid to date, and that then we can put it in for the second round of investment. And in the meantime, you know, we are still going to be going ahead with the consultation, which Warwickshire are leading. So that piece of work is still live and is still happening, and the investment that we've made hasn't gone away. So I suppose I wanted to underline kind of how important I think that is, and how positive I still feel about it, even though we didn't get that first stab of money. And I think as well, the other thing that it's done is that it's made us think about, okay, what are the things that we can do? What are the things that we need to be thinking about together? How can we improve Greenhill Street, even if we know that it might take other people a while to be thinking about that. What are the things that we can lobby for change? So yeah, like I say, even though we didn't get the money, to my mind, it still feels like a positive place, and a positive place to be coming from. Yeah, so no, that's really important to say, Jenny, that by having worked up plans, you've got things that you can bid for, and you've got things that people can invest in. So what I'm really hoping to do is for us to get to a point where we've got a range of different plans at different levels, whether it be, here's some smaller scale stuff that we can do in the town centre, that we might pilot, that we might get some small scale investment into, you know, here's a big infrastructure capital development plan that we need a big chunk of money for. So on that note, John, does it make sense to hand over